Back in July, Russia's lower house of parliament passed a bill to introduce an experimental Islamic banking system in the country's mostly Muslim regions. The pilot project will start on September 1st and will last for 2 years. According to some estimates, Muslims make up nearly 10% of Russia's 143 million people, with 4 areas in the country's south having the highest concentration. By next month, the Russian regions of Chechnya, Dagestan, Tatarstan and Bashkortostan will have the option of conducting their finances in an Islamic-based banking system. Russian financial analysts believe that changes will help the country build new economic links with Muslim countries across the Gulf and Asia. Islamic banking practices forbid the charging of interest on loans and instead offer partnerships and participation in both profits and losses on certain investments. The system is gaining global popularity in financial hubs like London, Kuala Lumpur, Riyadh and Dubai. The move comes as Russia looks for new economic partners amid ongoing Western sanctions caused by the war in Ukraine. And to further discuss the Islamic banking pilot in Russia, joining me now from Moscow is Madina Kalimullina. She is Executive Secretary at the Russian Association of Experts in Islamic Finance, and from Geneva, Torek Farhadi. He is a former advisor to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So a warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So Torek, what does the Islamic banking entail and how will it work in Russia?
Well, Islamic banking can be a great tool for attracting financing and investment and creating trust. The tool that's most used is Sukuk, of course, which is an asset-backed bond. The investors take ownership in the asset and lease it back to the client. So it's most appropriate for long-term financing. Lately, it has been used for climate finance and green finance as well, the Sukuks, but it can be used for infrastructure. I think Islamic banking comes from a need to attract capital from where capital is, which in this case might be in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia. Large investment funds and investors want to invest, but they prefer invest with their vehicles for financing and conduit for financing that are appropriate for them because it's their money. So Sukuk bonds have been used for a long time in Germany. It has been used in leasing aircrafts, for which there is other methods as well, which is the Ejara by Etihad Airways.
So, Madina, was this regulation in the making for a long time? And what has pushed Russia to consider legalizing Islamic banking system?
Yeah, actually, the topic of Islamic finance in Russia has been on the agenda for about 10 years from the regulative perspective. And the law draft, which has been adopted recently, has been discussed for about 1 year. And this is really a step forward for the market with regard to Islamic finance development, because the market is really there. There is Islamic finance market in Russia, but it has been unregulated for all these years. I think it's starting from 2010 that the first Islamic finance companies have been established in Russia. And until now, until this year, we had no official adoption of any legislation for Islamic banking. And of course, this was the impediment for the Islamic finance market development. So therefore, we now have a law which is only for the experiment regime for 2 years, but still it is a very important step forward for market development.
So it's been on the agenda at least for 10 years. Torek, how has Russia's attack on Ukraine and the crippling Western-led sanctions it has provoked expedited this process?
Well, from what we understand, a lot of Russian citizens have gone to the Gulf countries and live there. There has been quite a bit of migration from Russia to Gulf countries. And there, of course, they have been exposed to banks. And I think without consideration of which religion one belongs to, Islamic finance is a number of methods of financing trade. There is, of course, Mubadala, which is trading commodities against currency, and Murabaha, which is cost plus financing, which is also a way of financing any asset that needs to be bought by with someone else's money. So the exposure that Russians got because a lot of people with money have traveled abroad now and are abroad, but they would like to do business in Russia because that's the country they know the most. So I think there is a market, and I would say that this has been provoked by the fact that a lot of the capital that could be invested in infrastructure in Russia can also be in the Gulf now.
So, Medina, Russia has chosen to experiment this new system for regions, namely Chechnya, Dagestan, Tatarstan, and Bashkortostan. Is it because most of these regions are predominantly Muslim?
Yes, there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, of course, this is mainly Muslim majority regions. But apart from that, these regions have already certain parts of practice of Islamic finance. So the main Islamic finance companies which are existing in Russia are based in that regions, particularly Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, Chechnya, and Dagestan. So there is already some practice. There is already some work that has been done, and these republics, these regions can share their expectations. They contributed to the development of the legislation of this particular law draft which has been adopted. So these I would say the main reasons, but the law draft has the opportunity to widen the number of regions during the experiment. So the special expert council within the government of Russia can add other regions during the experiment.
So, Tarek, if I'm not mistaken, the global Islamic banking sector is growing at 14% annually and is estimated to be worth around $1.99 trillion. Just how big is this industry, and is it likely to grow bigger?
Most likely, because as mentioned, it's not really only for Muslims, but for everybody. It's just a conduit for financing. And ethical finance and green financing also, it's finding the Sukuk products interesting. The philosophy behind Islamic finance is to be a participant in the risk. So musharaka, being partner in the risk, basically, if an investment goes up or down. And also, I must mention the concept of insurance in Islamic finance, which is takaful, which is probably included in this legislation that Dr. Medina is speaking about.
So, Medina, once it's operational, fully operational, let's say, how would that impact Russia's relations with the Middle Eastern and Islamic countries around the world?
Well, as you rightly mentioned, there are not only internal but international reasons for this development of this industry. Russia is now very actively developing its relations with the Middle Eastern countries, with the Islamic countries, with the OIC. And I would say that the MOU between the Bank of Russia and the Islamic Development Bank has already been signed back in 2016. So this is a long, I would say, middle-term relations which are continuing developing, and Russia's main trade partners are the Islamic and Middle Eastern countries. So the Russian exports is very actively going to those countries, particularly the agricultural exports, the fertilizers, and other export commodities. They go into the Muslim countries, and Islamic finance has a very known products like Murabaha, for example, trade-based finance, which is very actively developing in trade financing. And I think this is the second step for the development of Islamic finance market in Russia, because first of all, we need to implement all these instruments and to have a very sound regulation, which is going to be developed during this experimental regime. And the next step, I think, will be the international, Russia's joining the international market of Islamic finance.
So, Tarek, Qatar, Turkey, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Pakistan, they all account for the 93% of the Islamic banking. But it is also known that the UK is the first non-Muslim country to have established this Islamic banking system. if I'm not mistaken, back in 2000. So what prompted the UK to become their first non-Muslim country to adopt this system?
Well, Islamic finance is about making money, of course, but it's about taking risk together and making money. So London has been a center for finance for centuries. When Lloyd's of London was taking risk for shipping, for instance. And so it was natural that some associations of financiers got interested in these methods of financing that would satisfy the people who would bring the capital also to make these investments in securities, in assets and asset-backed securities and the sukuks and the bonds and the concept of Islamic bonds, basically. And I think the future is in climate finance, because there's quite a bit of climate finance worldwide. In Indonesia, it is starting, in Malaysia, and it can mobilize a lot of capital in order to finance these very long-term investments, 30 years, 45 years. That's ideal for the sukuks and Islamic finance.
All right, Torek and Madina, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.